The phrase, "send in the Marines," has become an emblematic expression in the lexicon of American foreign policy, a symbol of military intervention that resonates with decisive action. Unlike the commitment of full-scale military operations, the deployment of the Marine Corps has often been framed as a less aggressive diplomatic tool. In practice, however, it has consistently embodied the unwavering resolve of American geopolitical interests. This phrase encapsulates a unique brand of gunboat diplomacy, where the mere presence of Marines on a foreign shore serves as both a political statement and an implicit threat, a clear signal that the United States is prepared to protect its interests by any means necessary. The United States Marine Corps was established on November 10, 1775, predating the nation's own Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776. While its initial purpose was rooted in naval warfare, the true expeditionary nature of the Marines became profoundly clear during the 19th century, a period when the United States began to actively project its influence far beyond the American continent. It was during this era of expansion that the Corps evolved from a naval infantry force into a versatile instrument of power projection, capable of operating independently in hostile environments to achieve specific political and economic objectives. Their role was no longer just to fight at sea, but to bring American power to distant shores. A little-known but crucial fact underscores this evolution. The Marine Corps' first official combat mission was not in the defense of American ports, but an offensive action on foreign territory. During the First Barbary War, 1801 to 1805, small detachments of Marines were landed on the North African coast. Their mission was to protect the interests of American merchants who were being targeted by the Barbary states, which demanded tribute for safe passage. This early deployment established a critical precedent, creating the blueprint for countless future operations where Marines would be sent to foreign lands to safeguard American citizens, property, and economic ventures, effectively acting as the armed enforcers of the nation's commercial ambitions. This complex and often controversial role was articulated with stark honesty by one of the most famous Marines of the 20th century, Major General Smedley Butler. After a long and decorated career, Butler offered a profoundly critical reflection on his service, writing, "I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service. During that period, I spent most of my time as a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and for the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism." This powerful confession, published in his seminal book 1935, War is a Racket, stands as a classic and enduring exposé of the military-industrial complex, questioning the very morality of the missions he was celebrated for leading. Butler's words provide a crucial lens through which to view the history of the Corps, challenging the heroic narrative and revealing a darker, more pragmatic function. The duality of their mission, part diplomacy, part raw force, is captured in a timeless image. A gray dawn breaks over the deck of a warship. An officer in a crisp white uniform peers at a distant shore through his binoculars. Behind him, a line of Marines stands in full combat gear, their faces stoic and focused. They are on a mission officially designated to protect the interests of American citizens, a peaceful mandate on paper. Yet the air is thick with unspoken tension. No one knows for certain if this peaceful mission will devolve into violence. But history has already decided. Soon, blood may be shed on this foreign soil. The Marines are ready. They are always ready.
The dawn of the 19th century thrust the fledgling United States Marine Corps into its first significant overseas conflict, a series of engagements that would not only prove its combat effectiveness, but also forge its enduring reputation for daring and resilience. These were the Barbary Wars, a crucible in which the Marines transitioned from a theoretical naval infantry into a battle-hardened expeditionary force. It was here, on the shores of North Africa, that the Corps began to earn its formidable renown. The First Barbary War, 1801 to 1805, was ignited by the persistent aggression of the Barbary states Tripoli, Algiers, Tunis, and Morocco, which controlled maritime trade in the Mediterranean through piracy, demanding exorbitant tributes from foreign nations for the safe passage of their merchant vessels. On May 20, 1801, U.S. Secretary of the Navy Benjamin Stoddert dispatched a naval squadron for observation in the Mediterranean. Its true purpose, however, was to exert pressure on the Barbary rulers and put an end to the harassment of American shipping. This deployment marked a pivotal moment, signaling America's refusal to bow to extortion and its willingness to project military power to protect its economic interests abroad. The conflict's defining moment, and a cornerstone of Marine Corps lore, was the audacious assault on the Tripolitan city of Derna in 1805. In a highly unconventional operation, the United States lent its support to Hamet Karamanli, the exiled brother of the ruling Pasha of Tripoli, in his bid to seize the throne. A small, rugged force of approximately 400 to 500 men, a motley crew of U.S. Marines, Greek mercenaries, and Arab allies, was assembled under the command of American officer William Eaton and Marine Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon. In an epic feat of endurance, this small army marched across 500 miles of the unforgiving Libyan desert from Egypt to launch a surprise attack on Derna. This bold maneuver culminated in the first-ever full-scale amphibious assault conducted by the United States on foreign soil. As Eaton's ground forces stormed the city's defenses, they were supported by the cannons of American frigates, the Nautilus, Argus, and Hornet, which bombarded Derna from the sea. The successful capture of the city was a stunning tactical victory that applied immense pressure on the Pasha and ultimately contributed to the war's conclusion. This historic operation is immortalized in the opening line of the Marines' hymn, "From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli." These two locations, Mexico and North Africa, were chosen to represent the vast geographical reach and expeditionary spirit of the Marine Corps, with the shores of Tripoli paying direct homage to the heroic actions at Derna. Further cementing the Corps' reputation for valor during this period was a legendary act of bravery led by Lieutenant Stephen Decatur. On the night of February 16, 1804, Decatur commanded a small group of sailors on a covert mission into the heavily defended harbor of Tripoli. Their target was the captured American frigate USS Philadelphia, which had run aground and been seized by the Tripolitans. Under the cover of darkness, Decatur and his men, disguised aboard a captured Tripolitan ketch, stealthily approached the Philadelphia. The ensuing night raid was executed with lightning speed and precision. They swarmed the frigate, swiftly overpowered the Tripolitan garrison, and set the ship ablaze, denying the enemy a powerful warship. This daring feat was hailed as a model of audacity and masterful combat skill. Some historians speculate that this very operation became a spiritual precursor to the Marine Corps motto, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. The refusal to abandon a valuable American asset to the enemy, even at great risk, embodied an ethos of unwavering loyalty and commitment that would become the hallmark of the Corps. The Marine Corps' combat prowess was tested again during the Anglo-American War of 1812 to 1815. Marines were actively engaged in fierce battles on the Great Lakes and played key roles in the defense of key port cities. Although the war is often viewed as a strategic defeat for the United States, the performance of the Marines was a notable exception. They consistently proved themselves to be disciplined and effective fighting units, further enhancing their reputation for reliability in the heat of battle. It was this emerging professional ethos that Lieutenant Decatur himself captured when he remarked, "Courage comes not from being stronger than the enemy, but from being better prepared and understanding your mission." His words encapsulated the spirit of the new American Marine, a warrior defined not just by bravery, but by preparation, discipline, and a clear sense of purpose. The 19th century marked a transformative period for the United States Marine Corps as it evolved into a primary and frequently used instrument of American foreign policy and commercial expansion. Throughout this era, Marine detachments were landed in a multitude of countries with remarkable regularity. Officially, these interventions were consistently justified under the pretext of protecting the lives and property of American citizens. In practice, however, these missions often served as a cover for direct interference in the internal political affairs of sovereign nations, frequently resulting in the installation or support of rulers who were favorably disposed to the economic and strategic goals of the United States. Latin America and the Caribbean became the most common theaters for these deployments. The pattern of intervention was widespread and relentless, establishing a clear precedent for American hegemony in the Western Hemisphere. Examples from this period are numerous and illustrative. Mexico, 1820s to 1850s. Marines were involved in a series of incidents, conducting raids on port cities and providing armed protection for American merchants whose commercial activities were central to U.S. economic interests in the region. Nicaragua, 1850s to 1860s. In a clear example of intervention extending beyond purely American concerns, Marines were deployed to support the English-speaking settlement of Bluefields and to protect British interests, demonstrating a shared Anglo-American objective of maintaining stability for foreign enterprise. Central America. The frequency of these operations was staggering. Over a span of just 50 years, the Marine Corps conducted more than 30 separate operations in the region, making armed intervention a routine aspect of American diplomacy. As the century progressed, the focus of these interventions expanded across the Pacific to the Far East. The Boxer Rebellion in China, 1900 to 1901, represented a significant escalation in the scope and nature of Marine deployments. Here, U.S. Marines fought as part of a large international coalition of foreign troops assembled to crush a nationalist uprising against foreign influence and presence. A little-known fact about this campaign is that it provided a crucial proving ground for future Marine leaders. The celebrated General Smedley Butler participated in the suppression of the Boxer Rebellion, where he faced organized, disciplined armed forces rather than the scattered local militias typical of earlier interventions. It was for his actions in China that Butler would receive one of his 2 Medals of Honor, a testament to the intensity of the fighting. Perhaps the most potent symbol of this era's diplomacy from a position of strength was the opening of Japan, 1853 to 1854. In this instance, the projection of power was so effective that an actual landing was unnecessary. Commodore Matthew Perry's expedition, which included a contingent of Marines aboard his 4 imposing black ships, Kurohune, sailed into Edo Bay to compel Japan to end its centuries of isolation and open its ports to Western trade. The mere presence of this naval force, with its visible and well-armed Marines, was a powerful and unambiguous threat that forced the Tokugawa shogunate to concede to American demands. Perry's own words perfectly captured the assertive mindset of the time. "I assume to demand as a right, and not to solicit as a favor, those acts of courtesy which are due from one civilized nation to another." This period also gave rise to the conditions that would later be famously dubbed the Banana Wars. While the term itself belongs to a later era, a persistent rumor holds that the foundation for these conflicts was laid during these decades. American corporations, particularly powerful fruit companies, were already relying on the protection of the U.S. Marines to safeguard their vast plantations and quell local uprisings that threatened their commercial operations. The Corps was effectively becoming a private security force for American business interests, a role that would come to define its operations in the decades to come and solidify its reputation as the enforcer of American economic imperialism.
This era represents the zenith of American interventionism in Latin America and the Caribbean, a period when the U.S. Marine Corps was unapologetically employed to establish and enforce regional dominance. It was the age of open imperialism, defined by a series of conflicts and occupations collectively known as the Banana Wars.
The veneer of protecting citizens was stripped away to reveal a raw strategy of economic and political control, with the Marines serving as the architects of American hegemony. The most prolonged and telling example of this policy was the occupation of Haiti, 1915 to 1934. On July 28, 1915, President Woodrow Wilson gave the order, and 330 U.S. Marines landed in Port-au-Prince, initiating one of the longest military occupations in American history. The official pretext was the chronic political instability that plagued Haiti, the first nation in Latin America to achieve independence, 1804. The Wilson administration harbored fears that Germany or other European powers might exploit the chaos to establish a strategic foothold in the Caribbean, threatening American interests. The reality of the occupation, however, was a complete subjugation of Haitian sovereignty. The United States imposed a treaty that granted it sweeping powers, including the right to control Haiti's finances through an American-appointed General Collector of Customs, oversee all state revenues, prohibit Haiti from ceding any territory to foreign powers, and disband the existing Haitian army and establish a new American-led police force, the Gendarmerie d'Haïti. Little-known facts from this period reveal the brutal nature of the occupation. In a secret dispatch, Admiral William Caperton, who commanded the initial operations, described employing measures of military pressure during treaty negotiations, a clear euphemism for the threat of force. In 1918, the United States went so far as to draft a new constitution for Haiti, which, for the first time, allowed foreigners to own land. This change directly benefited American corporations, which began acquiring vast tracts of Haitian territory. By 1929, the country was engulfed in mass demonstrations and strikes. A U.S. Congressional Commission sent to investigate acknowledged that the situation is becoming tense. In suppressing this widespread unrest, the Marines inflicted heavy casualties on the civilian population. The historical absurdity of the situation was laid bare 19 years later, when the U.S. finally withdrew. The last contingent of Marines departed on August 15, 1934, leaving behind a nation whose sovereignty had been systematically dismantled for nearly 2 decades. To this day, Washington has never issued an official apology for this profound violation of Haiti's independence. As one historian aptly summarized, the occupation of Haiti is not so much a story of war as it is a story of the prolonged enslavement of a sovereign state under the guise of protecting interests. Haiti was not an isolated case. The Banana Wars saw similar interventions across the region between 1898 and 1934. Cuba, 1900 to 1903, occupation following the Spanish-American War. Nicaragua, 1909 to 1933, the longest occupation lasting 22 years, where General Smedley Butler personally led operations, and a fierce guerrilla war led by Augusto Sandino became a hemisphere-wide symbol of resistance. Dominican Republic, 1916 to 1924, an 8-year occupation. Mexico, 1914, the seizure of the port city of Veracruz. General Butler, in his later years, provided a legendary and brutally honest confession of his role in these conflicts. I participated in the seizures of cities in Mexico, in Central America, and in the Caribbean. I helped the financial magnates of America to rob several countries for the benefit of making money. I helped the United Fruit Company to stage a revolution in Honduras in 1911. A little-known fact from the Nicaraguan occupation highlights a sinister innovation in warfare. Between 1926 and 1933, U.S. Marine aviation was used for the first time in history to suppress a guerrilla insurgency. To combat Augusto Sandino's partisans, the Marines deployed a small air force consisting of 6-seat de Havilland biplanes, a 1917 model, Curtiss OC-2 light bombers, and Vought O-2U Corsair aircraft. Sandino himself became an icon of anti-imperialist struggle. By 1932, he commanded a force of over 5,000 partisans. Despite the technological advantage of American air power and the persistence of ground troops, the U.S. was never able to fully crush the rebellion. The conflict only ended when the United States made a political decision to withdraw its forces in 1933. This new reality of intervention is captured in a stark artistic image. The Nicaraguan Jungle, 1929. A de Havilland biplane flies low over the vast green canopy of the tropical forest. The pilot scans the ground below, searching for signs of partisan camps. The earth seems alive, concealing people who despise the American presence. The pilot presses the button for his machine gun. Bullets tear through the leaves, firing blind into the dense foliage. No one can verify if they hit their target. This is the new face of protecting interests, delivered from a height of 1,000 feet.
The Second World War represented a monumental and irreversible transformation for the United States Marine Corps. The global conflict completely redefined its character, mission, and scale. If the preceding decades had cast the Marines as small, expeditionary detachments for demonstrating force and protecting commercial interests, the war against the Axis powers demanded something entirely different. The Corps was forced to evolve from a specialized police force into a true combined arms army, complete with its own integrated aviation, armor, and artillery, capable of waging large-scale amphibious warfare against a modern, heavily fortified enemy. The statistical growth of the Corps during this period is staggering and illustrates the sheer magnitude of this transformation. In 1941, on the eve of America's entry into the war, the Marine Corps consisted of just 2 brigades. By 1945, it had expanded into a massive force of 6 full divisions. Its total manpower skyrocketed from a few thousand active-duty personnel to a peak of more than 400,000. This was not merely an increase in numbers, it was a fundamental shift in the American military structure, establishing the Marine Corps as a primary and indispensable component of the nation's war-fighting capability. This new force was forged in the crucible of the Pacific Theater, where the Marines spearheaded the brutal island-hopping campaign against the Empire of Japan. Their name became synonymous with some of the most legendary and ferocious battles of the war. Guadalcanal, 1942 to 1943, the first major Allied offensive against Japan, a grueling 6-month struggle that tested the limits of endurance and halted the Japanese advance in the Pacific. Peleliu, 1944, a battle of shocking attrition, it became one of the most savage and costly engagements in the history of the Marine Corps for an island of questionable strategic value. Iwo Jima, 1945, an iconic and symbolic victory, immortalized by the famous photograph of the flag raising on Mount Suribachi, but achieved at a horrific cost in human lives. Okinawa, 1945, the final major battle of the war, a brutal campaign that served as a terrifying preview of the potential carnage of a full-scale invasion of the Japanese mainland and underscored the horrors of the impending nuclear age. A little-known but revolutionary aspect of this evolution was the Marine Corps' tactical re-equipment. For the first time, the Corps was issued its own organic heavy weaponry on a massive scale, including flamethrowers, tanks, and, most critically, its own dedicated air wings. This was a profound change in doctrine. The Marines were no longer simply policemen being transported by the Navy. They had become self-sufficient specialists in the art of the amphibious assault, masters of storming and securing heavily fortified enemy positions. This integrated approach to combat, combining air, land, and sea under a single command structure, became the hallmark of the modern Marine Corps. The invasion of Okinawa, which raged from April 1st to June 22, 1945, stands as one of the most brutal and defining operations in this new era of warfare. The 82-day battle for the island was characterized by a level of ferocity and desperation that shocked even seasoned combat veterans. The human cost was immense. The fighting claimed the lives of over 50,000 Japanese soldiers and around 12,000 Americans, of whom 1,300 were Marines. The tragedy was compounded by the devastating toll on the island's civilian population, with casualties reaching as high as 100,000. This harrowing reality of this new form of industrial-scale warfare left an indelible scar on those who survived it. The experience was captured in the stark and poignant words of one veteran who fought there. On Okinawa, we understood that war is not an adventure, it is hell, in which only the luckiest survive. This sentiment reflected a profound loss of innocence, marking the final transition of the Marine from a diplomat with a rifle to a hardened soldier in a global superpower's army.
The Korean War became the first major hot conflict of the Cold War, a brutal testing ground where the ideologies of East and West clashed in open combat. For the U.S. Marine Corps, still flush with its victories in the Pacific, the war would present an entirely new set of challenges and forge one of the most enduring legends in its history. The Battle of the Chosin Reservoir would become a defining moment, a trial by fire and ice, where the 1st Marine Division faced annihilation and emerged with its honor not only intact, but burnished into legend. The war began with a stunning success for the Corps. In September 1950, with American and South Korean forces pushed back to a desperate perimeter around the port of Pusan, General Douglas MacArthur conceived a bold and brilliant strategic maneuver, an amphibious landing at Incheon, deep behind enemy lines. Thousands of Marines from the 1st Marine Division were tasked with executing this high-risk operation. Their successful landing was a masterful tactical stroke that completely outflanked the North Korean army, leading to the recapture of Seoul and turning the tide of the war in a matter of days. However, this triumph was short-lived. As American forces pushed north toward the Yalu River, the border with China, a new and formidable adversary entered the conflict. On October 19, 1950, China intervened under the guise of the Chinese People's Volunteer Army. The Chinese command unleashed a massive force of approximately 8 full-strength divisions against the scattered units of the American X-Corps, which included the 1st Marine Division. Positioned around the frozen expanse of the Chosin Reservoir in the desolate mountains of northeastern Korea, the Marines suddenly found themselves isolated and facing overwhelming odds. The ensuing Battle of the Chosin Reservoir, fought through November and December 1950, was a descent into a frozen hell. In temperatures that plummeted to -30 to 40 degrees Celsius, the Marines were completely encircled by an enemy that outnumbered them nearly 10 to 1. The fighting was savage and relentless, resulting in approximately 20,000 American casualties from combat, exposure, and frostbite. Yet instead of surrendering or being annihilated, the 1st Marine Division defied all expectations. They executed a fighting withdrawal that has since been immortalized not as a retreat, but as a heroic breakout from encirclement. This indomitable spirit was perfectly captured in a legendary statement by the commander of the 1st Marine Division, General Oliver P. Smith. When informed of his predicament, he famously remarked, "Retreat? We're just attacking in another direction." This quote came to symbolize the tenacity and fighting ethos of the Corps. While the breakout was a success in terms of survival, it came at a staggering cost to both sides. According to some sources, Chinese casualties were astronomical, with estimates of more than 100,000 killed and wounded, making it one of the most lethal and costly battles of the entire Cold War. Beyond the strategic maneuvers and casualty counts lay a story of profound human tragedy. The combat conditions were nothing short of apocalyptic. The American cold weather uniforms, designed for the more moderate climates of Europe, proved disastrously inadequate in the Siberian cold. Frostbite became a more dangerous enemy than Chinese bullets, inflicting more casualties than combat wounds. rations froze solid in the field, forcing soldiers to subsist on barely warm food. It was a primal struggle for survival against both a determined enemy and a merciless environment. The official history of the 1st Marine Division would later state, "The 1st Marine Division made one of the greatest retreats in the history of warfare, preserving its combat capability and the honor of the regiment." The reputation for toughness earned by the Marines at Chosin gave rise to a host of folklore, including a well-known military anecdote from the period. The story, though legendary, reflects the esteem in which the individual Marine was held. During the Korean War, a Chinese company encountered a single American Marine. The combat officer shouted, "One Marine is no match for our company." The Marine replied, "Absolutely right. Retreat, one by one."
The Vietnam War marked a profound and painful turning point for the United States Marine Corps, fundamentally altering the concept of its application in modern warfare. The familiar role of diplomats with rifles, effective in short-term interventions in conventional battles, was ill-suited for the complexities of a protracted counterinsurgency. In the dense jungles and rice paddies of Southeast Asia, the Marines were forced to evolve into specialists in guerrilla warfare, a brutal and disorienting conflict that would challenge the very identity of the Corps and the nation it served. The official start of the Marines' large-scale involvement began in March 1965. The initial deployment came with a carefully defined and limited mission: to protect the American base at Da Nang. In reality, this was the opening move in a massive escalation, signaling the beginning of America's deep and disastrous immersion into the Vietnamese Civil War. What began as a defensive posture quickly transformed into a full-spectrum offensive campaign against a tenacious and elusive enemy. Marine operations in Vietnam were diverse and grueling, spanning the country's varied and hostile terrain. Operation Market Time. Marines conducted extensive riverine and coastal operations, attempting to interdict the flow of supplies and personnel along Vietnam's vast coastline and intricate network of waterways. Mekong Delta offensives. They engaged in punishing combat operations in the swampy, labyrinthine terrain of the Mekong Delta, a Viet Cong stronghold where the enemy seemed to melt into the landscape. The Battle for Hue in 1968. During the Tet Offensive, Marines fought one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the war, a brutal house-to-house struggle to retake the ancient imperial city of Hue after it was captured by North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces. The scale of the Marine commitment was immense. At the peak of the war, approximately 80,000 Marines were deployed in Vietnam, making it the largest and most sustained operation for the Corps since the Second World War. The human cost of this commitment was staggering, leaving a deep scar on the institution. The losses and statistics tell a grim story. Killed in action, over 12,700 Marines. Wounded, over 88,600. These casualties accounted for roughly 20% of all American losses in Vietnam, a disproportionately high figure that reflected the intensity of the fighting in the sectors where Marines operated. A little-known fact from this era is that the Vietnam War served as the combat baptism for the widespread use of helicopters. For the first time, helicopters were not just an auxiliary tool, but a central element of battlefield logistics and tactics, used extensively to transport combat units into and out of remote, otherwise inaccessible areas. The invaluable and often costly experience gained in Vietnam directly influenced the future of vertical envelopment, with the conceptual roots of later aircraft like the MV-28 Osprey tracing back to the lessons learned in the jungles of Southeast Asia. More than any previous conflict, Vietnam exacted a heavy psychological toll. The war served as a brutal reminder to the American public and its military that diplomacy with rifles had its limits and could fail catastrophically. Despite overwhelming numerical and technological superiority, U.S. forces could not break the will of the Vietnamese partisans, who continued to fight with relentless determination. This bitter stalemate led to the collapse of the myth of unconditional American military supremacy, revealing that superior firepower could not guarantee victory against a deeply committed insurgency fighting on its own soil. The difficult lessons of this new kind of war were perfectly encapsulated in the words of one commander reflecting on the experience. "In the jungles of Vietnam, we learned that a rifle without diplomacy is just killing, and diplomacy without a rifle is just talking." It was a sobering conclusion, born from a decade of bloodshed that would forever change how the Marine Corps viewed its role in the world.
The period following the withdrawal from Vietnam saw the Marine Corps pivot, cementing its role as the United States' primary instrument for rapid global crisis response. This era was defined by a series of diverse and challenging deployments that ranged from swift invasions in America's backyard to ill-fated peacekeeping missions, and finally to large-scale conventional warfare. The Marines became the default answer to a wide array of foreign policy challenges, embodying a flexible and forceful projection of American power. A prime example of this new doctrine in action was the invasion of Grenada in 1983, codenamed Operation Urgent Fury. On October 25, 1983, U.S. Marines spearheaded a landing on the small Caribbean island following a leftist coup that Washington feared would create a Soviet-aligned state in the region. The operation was another stark demonstration of American hegemonyism in the Caribbean basin. The official justification was the need to protect American citizens, medical students, and prevent further Soviet influence. An interesting detail that highlights the hurried nature of the invasion was that airborne troops were dropped from a height of 250 meters, higher than the planned 220 meters, and were saved from disaster only by the minimal resistance they encountered. The real result for Grenada was devastating. 45 Grenadians were killed, and over 100 were wounded. The island was occupied, and its economy was left in ruins. The international condemnation was swift. On November 2, 1983, the United Nations General Assembly passed Resolution 38/7, which condemned the invasion as a gross violation of international law and an infringement of the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of that state. The resolution passed with 108 nations in favor, with only the United States and 8 other allies voting against it. In stark contrast to the swift, if controversial, victory in Grenada, the Marines' deployment to Lebanon from 1982 to 1984 became a tragic lesson in the perils of intervention in a complex civil war. Deployed as part of a multinational peacekeeping force, the Marines' presence was, in reality, an attempt by the U.S. to impose a specific political outcome on the war-torn nation. This mission into a volatile and hostile environment culminated in disaster. On October 23, 1983, a truck packed with explosives slammed into the barracks housing U.S. Marines in Beirut, killing 241 American servicemen, the vast majority of them Marines. It was the single deadliest day for the Corps since the Battle of Iwo Jima, and became a symbol of the profound dangers of ill-defined peacekeeping missions. The sentiment of the troops on the ground was captured in the haunting words of one survivor. "We came here to help, but nobody wanted our help. They wanted us to leave, and they made it very clear." The decade ended with the Marine Corps showcasing its evolution into a technologically superior, modern fighting force during the first Gulf War in 1991. Operation Desert Storm saw the Corps conduct the largest amphibious deployment of personnel and equipment since 1945, positioning a massive force in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. During the conflict, the Marines played a crucial role in protecting strategic oil facilities, leading assault operations against heavily fortified Iraqi positions, and providing critical aviation support. A little-known fact from this war was the decisive advantage provided by American technology.
The Marine Corps made extensive use of night vision and other advanced systems that were completely unavailable to the Iraqi army. For the first time on such a grand scale, the world witnessed a clear example of asymmetric warfare, with American technological supremacy ensuring a swift and decisive victory.
The dawn of the 21st century ushered in a new and grueling era for the U.S. Marine Corps, one defined by protracted, large-scale occupations in the Middle East. In this new paradigm, the Corps became a primary tool of American intervention, and the traditional concept of protecting interests degraded into full-scale nation-building campaigns that would become known as the Endless Wars. The invasion of Iraq, which began on March 20, 2003, placed the Marines at the forefront of the assault. As part of the first echelon of advancing forces, they spearheaded the push towards the capital, storming into Baghdad in April 2003. However, the initial victory soon gave way to a brutal and bloody insurgency. The defining engagement for the Corps in Iraq was the Battle of Fallujah in 2004. This series of intense urban assaults saw Marines storming a city that had become a bastion of the Iraqi resistance. The fighting was exceptionally fierce, a house-to-house grind that resulted in devastating losses on both sides. The statistics from the long years in Iraq paint a grim picture of the cost. Marine deaths, over 700. Wounded, over 3,000. Beyond the numbers, the conflict left a lasting psychological trauma among its survivors. A little-known fact that revealed the strain of the conflict occurred in 2005. For the first time during the Iraq War, the Marine Corps was forced to resort to the involuntary call-up of reservists. This was a clear indicator that the relentless demands of the war were exceeding the capacity of the all-volunteer force. Simultaneously, the United States was engaged in another long-term conflict in Afghanistan, 2001 to 2021. Here, the Marines were deployed to the volatile southern provinces of Helmand and Kandahar, the traditional heartland of the Taliban. In this theater, they faced a different kind of challenge. Unlike in other regions, the Marines in Afghanistan were pitted against an enemy with a long and successful history of guerrilla warfare, honed during their fight against the Soviet Union. This led to a strategy often described as controlled chaos. The intractability of the Afghan conflict was captured in a statement by the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General James Conway, in 2010. His words proved to be a sinister prophecy. I'm confident that in 2011, some U.S. Army units in some areas of Afghanistan will turn over their responsibilities to Afghanistan security forces, but I doubt it will be the Marines. Helmand and Kandahar provinces are the Taliban's heartland. Frankly, I think it will be a few more years before the situation there allows us to leave. The war would in fact continue for another decade. An interesting rumor from this period suggests that the complete failure of the traditional diplomacy with rifles model forced the Marines to adopt harsher methods in Afghanistan than they had employed elsewhere. The profound sense of futility that came to define this era is captured in a final, poignant image. A market day in Helmand Province, 2008. A Marine in full combat gear walks down a dusty street, his rifle at the ready. The local people avoid his gaze, though some may still believe the Americans are here to protect their interests. But hearts have long since turned to the Taliban, who have promised to drive out the invaders. The Marine senses this deep-seated hostility, but continues his mission. He does not know that in a few years, the Taliban will reclaim everything that was won with American blood. In the 21st century, the strategic compass of the United States Marine Corps has undergone a dramatic reorientation. After 2 decades of being mired in the counterinsurgency campaigns of the Middle East, the American military command has pivoted the Corps' focus to the Indo-Pacific region. This shift is a direct response to the rising influence of China, fundamentally altering the Marines' mission from protecting interests in smaller nations to preparing for potential conflict with a peer-level global superpower. This new strategic direction is codified in a new doctrine known as Force Design 2030. This forward-looking strategy aims to reshape the Marine Corps into a lighter, more agile, and technologically advanced force, specifically designed to operate effectively in a conflict with China. A key innovation of this doctrine is the creation of new types of units, most notably the Marine Littoral Regiments. These units are specialized in controlling and defending strategic island chains and coastlines, making them ideal for the archipelagic geography of the Pacific. The core of this strategy revolves around a concept known as the First Island Chain. This involves the strategic distribution of marine forces across the series of archipelagos that stretch from Indonesia to Japan, effectively forming a barrier that separates mainland China from the open Pacific Ocean. The objective is to prevent the infiltration of Chinese naval and air forces to the west in the event of a conflict, using these island outposts as forward operating bases for anti-ship missiles, reconnaissance, and air defense. According to some rumors and interpretations, this strategic realignment has not gone unnoticed. Chinese analysts have expressed growing concern that the United States is no longer just posturing, but is actively preparing for a potential war with China. This perception signals a significant evolution in the role of the Marine Corps, from diplomats with rifles intervening in smaller states to combat blockers arrayed against a potential superpower. The sentiment was succinctly captured by Chinese commentator Wu Wei, who stated, "The Americans are no longer confident. They feel that the sea no longer belongs to them, and they cannot monopolize it." As of 2024, the modern Marine Corps maintains a significant forward presence in key locations, reflecting this new focus. South Korea, Japan, Guam, the Philippines, Australia for joint exercises. Contingents also remain deployed in other partner nations, including NATO members in Europe and strategic locations in the Middle East. Today, the U.S. Marine Corps numbers approximately 180,000 active duty personnel, making it the second largest branch of the U.S. military after the Army. This new mission is supported by a host of advanced technologies and weapon systems. The MV-22 Osprey, which has replaced the previous generation of transport helicopters. Advanced unmanned systems for long-range reconnaissance and surveillance. Integration with naval assets like the littoral combat ship. New generations of night vision and communication systems. This technological leap presents an interesting paradox. Despite the advanced drones, cyber capabilities, and precision munitions, the fundamental role of the Marine Corps remains unchanged: to be the first to land, the first to fight, and the first to establish a foothold on hostile shores. The technology has evolved, but the human courage and fighting spirit at the core of the institution remain its greatest asset. This new reality is perfectly captured in a final modern image. A military base on Guam, 2024. A young Marine sits in an air-conditioned command center, his eyes fixed on a monitor displaying the feed from a drone flying high over the South China Sea. A voice crackles in his headset. Flyby complete, no suspicious objects detected. The Marine sighs. He doesn't know if this work will prevent a war, or if the next war will be fought entirely in the virtual realm. Perhaps the future of combat is not a personal clash with an enemy, but the careful management of screens thousands of kilometers from the fight. But he is ready for either scenario, because Marines are always ready.
Beyond the official histories and battle reports lies the rich folklore of the Marine Corps, a collection of anecdotes, rumors, and legends that capture the true spirit and formidable reputation of the institution. These stories, passed down through generations, offer a glimpse into the raw experiences and perceptions of the Marines on the ground. An anecdote from the Korean War: why 2 Marines? A popular tale that circulated during the Korean War illustrates the almost mythical status of the individual Marine.
As the story goes, soldiers of the Chinese People's Liberation Army observed a single American Marine hold off an entire battalion for an hour, killing more than 200 enemy soldiers before he was finally overwhelmed. When the Chinese battalion commander wrote his after-action report, he allegedly concluded, "One Marine against the battalion is a fair fight. If there had been 2 Marines, we would have stood no chance." The rumor of Smedley Butler's special operations. While General Butler's official record is one of the most decorated in Marine Corps history, some archival sources hint at a shadow career. Rumors persist that Butler participated not only in documented official operations, but also in secret missions to overthrow regimes deemed unfriendly to American interests. If true, these clandestine activities would represent one of the most closely guarded chapters in the history of the Marine Corps. The legend of the Invisible Marines. In the aftermath of the First World War, whispers began to circulate within the military about the Marine Corps experimenting with unconventional tactics. According to this legend, the Corps studied and adapted the forest fighting spirit and camouflage techniques of Native American warriors. This folklore, whether based in fact or fiction, is said to have influenced the later formation of specialized reconnaissance and special operations units within the Corps. A real anecdote from a Japanese officer in 1945. The ferocity of the Marines in the Pacific Theater left a profound impression on their adversaries. One captured Japanese officer later told his interviewers, "I never saw an enemy who was so willing to die. The American Marines did not fight for an empire or for ideas. They fought for the honor of their regiment. It was terrifying." A rumor from the Boxer Rebellion in China, 1900. The official history of the international intervention in China often smooths over the darker aspects of the campaign. However, some sources allege that American Marines, incited by the brutal actions of their European counterparts, committed atrocities against participants in the Boxer Rebellion. The official record either denies or minimizes these claims, leaving a cloud of uncertainty over the events. General Butler's symbolic quote on his service. Perhaps no words better capture the complex legacy of the Corps during the age of expansion than a final introspective quote from Smedley Butler himself. Reflecting on his long career, he said, "If I had realized back then that I was participating in an imperial adventure, I would not have proudly worn my uniform. But I only learned that after I retired, when it was already too late."
The history of the United States Marine Corps is a story of relentless evolution. It traces the transformation of a military instrument from its origins as small detachments protecting American merchants in the 19th century to a highly specialized, globally deployed force prepared for high-stakes combat with potential world rivals. The journey from the shores of Tripoli to the island chains of the Indo-Pacific encapsulates the growth of American power itself, with the Marines consistently serving as its sharpest edge. This long and often bloody history raises a fundamental philosophical question. Do the Marines remain diplomats with rifles, as they were once dubbed, or have they become simply soldiers, the unquestioning enforcers of political orders handed down from Washington? The evidence presents a deep and unsettling historical paradox. The Marine Corps was created for defense, ostensibly to protect the nation's interests. Yet its history is overwhelmingly one of offense, occupation, and the raw demonstration of force. The mission to protect property frequently turned into the seizure of land. The mandate to protect citizens often became the justification for occupying sovereign states. This inherent contradiction is not lost on the modern leadership of the Corps. As one contemporary Marine commander noted, the Corps mission has changed little over the generations. Our task has not changed since Butler's time. We still go where we are sent, and we carry out our orders. The difference is that now we understand the price we pay, and the price that others pay. This sober reflection acknowledges the heavy cost of their legacy, both for the Marines themselves and for the nations where they have been deployed. Beyond the battlefield, the Marine Corps has carved out a permanent place in the cultural imagination. The image of the Marine in a white uniform has become an enduring symbol of American might, an icon reinforced by countless films, from heroic portrayals of World War II to modern blockbusters. In popular culture, the Marine remains the epitome of American military power and resolve. As the Corps looks to the future, a new era of conflict appears on the horizon. The Marines are now preparing for a type of war that may be entirely unmanned, fought with drones and cyber weapons, or, conversely, one that is more intensely human than ever before. The lines between cyberspace and the traditional battlefield are blurring, creating a hybrid environment where the old rules no longer apply. In the final analysis, the United States Marine Corps remains a force of diplomats with rifles, but today their rifles are capable of speaking a language of power that is understood across the entire globe. The ultimate question is whether, in the century to come, they will be used as instruments of peace or agents of war. This enduring confidence, bordering on bravado, is captured in a final modern anecdote. Why isn't a Marine afraid of China? Because he's never met an enemy he couldn't beat. And what if he does? Then China will meet the Marines, and everyone will understand why they call it a victory machine. But of course, these are just the rumors and hopes of military strategists.